Before we start today, I want to say something real quick. After last week's episode, I heard from a few listeners, some politely, some less politely, about the Berkeley Muse story. Specifically, that family and friend history describes him as a waterman, working on his boat, and that official records don't always tell the whole truth. And you know what? That tension right there, between what's written down and what's remembered, that's not a mistake. That's history. Court records, newspaper accounts, and government investigations tell us what authorities recorded at the time. Families remember who a person was to them. Those two things don't always line up neatly, especially in working communities where survival didn't always look legal on paper. Everything shared on this show comes from documented sources, but documented doesn't mean complete. And history doesn't get better by pretending otherwise. So if you have letters, photos, logs, or first-hand accounts, I want to see them. That's how history sharpens instead of hardens. All right, let's get into it. This is Draven's Den. And welcome back. My name is Stan Miles, and I'm going to guide you by the hand through our bumpy road called history. If this is your first time listening, this is the show where we slow history down just enough to hear it breathe, where the past isn't a list of dates, but a collection of human decisions. Some brave, some ridiculous, and some that probably seemed like a good idea at the time. Today's episode is a weekly roundup for February 3rd through February 6th. 4 days, a lot of history, and at least one moment where humanity absolutely should have known better by now. But first, let's get back to the family thread. This is part 2 of the Berkeley Muse story, The Night on the River. By historical accounts, the night of April 7, 1959, there was a heavy fog across the Potomac. Heavy enough that one could say cloak themselves if one did not want to be seen clearly. The term fog gets used in many forms: weather, memory, and yes, history. Though in history, the fog comes in the form of the difference between written documentation by authorities and family stories. This is where the story narrows, and where certainty breaks down. According to multiple contemporary accounts and later historical analysis, Berkeley Muse was on the Potomac River with 2 other men when they were encountered by Maryland fisheries enforcement officers. The Maryland officers believed the men were illegally harvesting oysters in contested waters. What followed was a nighttime pursuit towards the Virginia side of the river. That much is consistent across the record. What happens next depends on who is telling the story. According to reporting cited in the Rappahannock Record, and later summarized by historian Henry Lane Hull, shots were fired during the encounter, and Berkeley Muse was struck in the chest and fatally wounded aboard the boat. He died before medical help could arrive. Muse was 31 years old, married, and the father of 3 children. What is not clearly established, then or now, is who fired first, whether Muse or his companions were armed, or how authorities should have applied once the pursuit crossed into Virginia waters. There were no recordings, no neutral observers, only official reports, testimony, and grief. Some later accounts, including regional oral histories and watermen's recollections documented in Chesapeake Bay focused historical writing, describe Muse as a working waterman participating in the oyster trade. Other records identify him primarily as a farmer and a land developer with ties to river work, reflecting how blurred those roles often were in Potomac communities where seasonal oystering supplemented livelihoods. That distinction matters, because it reminds us how easily real people become flattened into labels after they're gone. To Maryland authorities, this was enforcement in a long-running battle against illegal dredging. Officers had been fired upon in prior years. The river had already seen bloodshed. To many in Virginia's river towns, Muse's death confirmed a fear that had been growing for decades, that the oyster wars had crossed the line. that regulation had hardened into force, and that survival on the water now carried the risk of lethal consequences. Two sides, one river, overlapping laws, no shared control. Muse's death did not immediately end the conflict, but it made denial impossible. As noted in later historical summaries of the Oyster Wars, including academic treatments of Chesapeake Bay resource conflicts, the shooting became a turning point cited by lawmakers when arguing that the existing system had failed. Once someone dies, the question stops being who owns the oysters and becomes, what is this costing us? That's the moment the river stopped being just a boundary and became evidence. The family thread reminds us that history doesn't just happen to famous people. It happens to families, communities, rivers, and the people caught between law and livelihood. Before we move on, remember this. Family stories don't survive because they're neat. They survive because someone refuses to let them disappear. Every generation inherits more than names and dates. We inherit unfinished questions. This thread isn't about rewriting history. It's about standing where memory and record overlap, and admitting that sometimes the truth lives in the tension between them. So I ask you to send your family threads that you believe should not be forgotten. They don't have to be about the famous ones, not about war heroes. Tell me about the quiet ones. The people in your family who made a choice that changed the direction of everyone who came after, even if no one outside the family noticed. Send those stories in to me, and I'll put them on the air. Send them to dravensden@gmail.com. Now, back to the rest of history. While February 3rd, 1945 is widely recognized as the start of the Battle of Manila, the city was not fully liberated on that day. Instead, it marked the initial arrival of the U.S. 1st Cavalry Division, which entered the city and liberated more than 3,700 Allied civilian prisoners of war at the University of Santo Tomas internment camp. The intense urban battle for the capital continued for a full month, concluding with the official liberation of Manila a month later on March 3rd. But liberation came at an awful cost. The Battle of Manila became one of the most destructive urban battles of the war, with Japanese forces committing widespread atrocities against civilians as they lost control of the city. Over 100,000 civilians were killed. Much of the city was leveled, and Manila went from Pearl of the Orient to rubble in a matter of weeks. Victory didn't look triumphant. It looked devastated. February 3rd reminds us that liberation is sometimes the least terrible outcome, not a clean one. And February 3rd, 1870, the 15th Amendment to the United States Constitution was officially ratified. It became part of the Constitution after Iowa became the 28th state to ratify it, fulfilling the 3/4 majority requirement. In theory, it prohibited denying the right to vote based on race. In practice, states immediately found creative ways around it. Poll taxes, literacy tests, grandfather clauses. The amendment mattered. It still does. But February 3rd is a reminder that writing something into law is only step one. Enforcing it is where history actually happens. In 2002, the New England Patriots defeated the heavily favored St. Louis Rams 20-17 in Super Bowl 36 at the Louisiana Superdome in New Orleans. This historic victory marked the Patriots' first Super Bowl championship and the beginning of their 2-decade dynasty under head coach Bill Belichick and quarterback Tom Brady. Entering as 14-point underdogs, New England utilized a strong defensive performance to force 3 turnovers, building a 17-3 lead by the third quarter. The Rams' greatest show on turf, offense rallied in the fourth quarter to tie the game 17-17, with only 1 minute 30 seconds remaining. Operating without timeouts, Tom Brady led a final 53-yard drive to set up Adam Vinatieri, who kicked a game-winning 48-yard field goal as time expired. The New England Patriots upset the heavily favored St. Louis Rams, launching the Brady-Belichick dynasty and quietly ruining the next 2 decades for everyone else. At the time, it looked like a fluke. In hindsight, it was the beginning of a football empire and a national conversation about whether deflated footballs can emotionally scar entire fan bases. On February 3rd, 1959, the rock and roll world was forever changed when a small plane crashed in a cornfield near Clear Lake, Iowa, killing 3 of its biggest rising stars. The tragedy was later immortalized as The Day the Music Died in Don McLean's 1971 anthem, American Pie. The crash claimed the lives of 4 people. Buddy Holly, who was 22, the legendary frontman of the Crickets and pioneer of modern rock recording. Ritchie Valens, he was 17, a teenage sensation known for the hit La Bamba. J.P. the Big Bopper Richardson, he was 28, a charismatic Texas DJ and singer of Chantilly Lace. And Robert Peterson, 21, the young pilot of the Beechcraft Bonanza. The artists were on the poorly planned winter dance party tour, traveling between venues on an unheated bus that left several musicians with frostbite. Frustrated by the conditions, Holly chartered a plane following their final show at the Surf Ballroom. Richardson, who was suffering from the flu, convinced Holly's bassist Waylon Jennings to give up his seat. Ritchie Valens won his seat after winning a coin toss against Tommy Alsop. Investigations cited poor wintry weather and pilots' lack of experience with the plane's specific instrument gauges. The site of their final performance, the Surf Ballroom, was declared a National Historic Landmark in 2021 and remains a site of pilgrimage for music fans. Rock and roll didn't stop, but it grew up overnight. Sometimes culture changes, not with explosion, but with an empty stage. 80 years ago, on February 4th, 1945, the Yalta Conference, codenamed the Argonaut Conference, officially began in the Crimean resort town of Yalta. The summit brought together the big 3 Allied leaders: U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin. The plan the final defeat of Nazi Germany and negotiate the reorganization of post-war Europe. The conference lasted 8 days, concluding on February 11, 1945. Major decisions included division of Germany. The leaders agreed to divide Germany and Berlin into 4 occupation zones: American, British, French, and Soviet. Plans were finalized for a new international peacekeeping body, including the voting structure of the UN Security Council. Stalin committed the Soviet Union to entering the war against Japan within 2 or 3 months of Germany's surrender. A declaration of liberated Europe was signed, promising free and democratic elections in nations freed from Nazi control. While initially seen as a triumph of Allied unity, Yalta remained controversial. Many historians argued the compromises made there, particularly, I love that word, regarding Soviet influence in Eastern Europe, laid the groundwork for the Cold War within years of the summit. Stalin broke his pledge for free elections in Poland and other regions, leading to decades of Soviet dominance in the Eastern Bloc. Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin met to decide what post-war Europe would look like. They agreed on peace. They disagreed on freedom. Yalta shaped the Cold War before the Cold War even knew it was coming. Proof that even victory meetings can plant future conflicts. And February 4th, 1789, the Electoral College convened to cast the votes that made George Washington the first president of the United States. This historic event remains the only time a U.S. president was elected with a truly universal mandate. Washington received one of the 2 votes cast by each of the 69 electors, making him the only U.S. president in history to be elected unanimously, a feat he repeated in 1792. John Adams, receiving the second highest total of 34 votes, became the first vice president. Only 10 of the 11 states that had ratified the Constitution cast votes. New York failed to choose its electors in time. North Carolina and Rhode Island had not yet ratified the Constitution. The official result? while the electors voted on February 4th, the votes were not officially opened and counted by Congress until April 6, 1789. Washington didn't campaign. He didn't want the job. And the country basically said, "You're doing this anyway." Sometimes leadership starts with reluctance, and maybe we could use more of that. And in 1990, the sports world was highlighted by the retirement of legendary jockey Willie Shoemaker and the NFL Pro Bowl at Aloha Stadium. 1990 NFL Pro Bowl. The NFC defeated the AFC 27-21 in the 40th annual All-Star Game held in Honolulu. Okay, I'm sorry, guys. I know I can edit that out, but that's just too funny. In Honolulu, Hawaii. Sorry, Hawaii. Yeah, that's a tongue twister. Defensive back Jerry Gray of the Los Angeles Rams was named the game's most valuable player. The NFC defense recorded several sacks by players including Keith Millard and Kevin Green, while the offense featured touchdown passes to stars like Jerry Rice. The legend's last ride. Jockey Willie Shoemaker, then 58 years old, rode in the final race of his illustrious 41-year career at Santa Anita Park. Riding patchy ground fog. Shoemaker finished fourth in the $107,850 Legend's Last Ride handicap. He retired with a then record of 8,833 wins, including 11 victories in the Triple Crown races. On February 4, 2004, everybody's favorite kid, Mark Zuckerberg and his Harvard University roommates launched the Facebook from their dorm room in Kirkland House, initially designed as a digital directory for Harvard students. The platform achieved explosive growth almost immediately, registering over 1,200 users within the first 24 hours. Zuckerberg co-founded the site alongside Eduardo Severin, Dustin Moskovitz, Chris Hughes, and Andrew McCullum. By March 2004, it expanded to Stanford, Columbia, and Yale, eventually reaching the rest of the Ivy League that spring. The platform reached 1 million users by the end of 2004. The company officially dropped "the" from its name and became Facebook.com in 2005 after purchasing the domain for $200,000. As of early 2026, the platform, now part of Meta Platforms, has over 3 billion monthly active users and a market capitalization of approximately, get this, $1.8 trillion. Coincidentally, the Pentagon's DARPA research agency canceled its controversial LifeLog project, an initiative designed to create a database of a person's entire life, on the exact same day Facebook launched. Originally called The Facebook, only for Harvard students, and absolutely not designed, I want you guys to listen to this very carefully, absolutely not designed to ruin friendships, relationships, or for courts and potential employers and exes to stalk you. History rarely announces its consequences up front. February 5th, 1917, Germany proposed the Zimmermann telegram to Mexico. The telegram was a secret message sent in January 1917 by German Foreign Secretary Arthur Zimmermann to the German ambassador in Mexico. Germany offered Mexico a military alliance and financial support to reconquer lost territory in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona if the United States entered World War I against Germany. British intelligence intercepted and decoded the message in January and eventually shared it with U.S. President Woodrow Wilson on February 24, 1917. When the telegram was published in U.S. newspapers on March 1, 1917, it outraged the American public and became a major factor leading to the U.S. declaration of war on Germany in April. Mexico ultimately declined the proposal, concluding that a war with the U.S. was unfeasible. If Germany helped Mexico reclaim U.S. territory, Mexico would join World War I against America. The message was intercepted. America joined the war. And suddenly geography mattered a lot. One telegram changed global momentum. On February 5, 1937, President Franklin D. Roosevelt introduced the Judicial Procedures Reform Bill in 1937, a legislative proposal famously known as his Court Packing Plan. FDR proposed adding one new justice to the U.S. Supreme Court for every sitting justice over the age of 70 who refused to retire. The plan allowed for a maximum of 6 additional justices, which would have increased the size of the court from 9 to a total of 15. Frustrated by a conservative majority, the Four Horsemen, that had struck down key New Deal legislation like the National Recovery Act, Roosevelt sought to shift the court's ideological balance to favor his programs. It failed, but it permanently changed how Americans think about judicial independence. Some ideas don't pass, but still leave scars. The most significant sports event on February 5, 1985, was the birth of Cristiano Ronaldo, who is widely considered one of the greatest football players in history. Born in Portugal, he would go on to win 5 awards and hold the record for the most goals in international and UEFA Champions League history. On February 5, 1962, the world witnessed a rare celestial alignment and significant cultural milestones in music and civil rights. A rare total solar eclipse occurred, visible from parts of Indonesia and the Pacific. Coinciding with this, the 5 naked eye planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, were all aligned within 16 degrees of the Sun. Ray Charles began recording his revolutionary album, Modern Sounds in Country and Western Music, at Capitol Studios in New York. The sessions produced the hit I Can't Stop Lovin' You and bridged the gap between R&B and country music. Ringo Starr performed live with the Beatles for the first time, filling in for original drummer Pete Best, who was ill. And in Englewood, New Jersey, black and white parents staged an overnight sit-in at Lincoln School after the school board denied transfer requests for 9 black families seeking better facilities. And on February 6, 1943, several significant military developments occurred across the global theaters of World War II. Eisenhower named theater commander. General Dwight D. Eisenhower was officially designated the Commander-in-Chief of all Allied forces in the North American Theater of Operations. This expanded his previous role, which had been limited primarily to U.S. forces, to include all British and French troops in Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco. The Canadian corvette HMCS Louisbourg was bombed and sunk by Italian aircraft while escorting a convoy off the coast of Oran, Algeria. Following the major German defeat at Stalingrad earlier that week, Field Marshal Erich von Manstein flew to meet Adolf Hitler to request permission to withdraw German forces to more defensible positions along the Maas River. Yeah, I probably should have looked that one up. All right, Ronald Reagan was born on February 6, 1911, in Tampico, Illinois. Known as the Great Communicator, he transitioned from a career in Hollywood to become 40th President of the United States. Born to Nell and Jack Reagan, he spent most of his childhood in Dixon, Illinois, and graduated from Eureka College in 1932. He worked as a radio sports announcer in Iowa before moving to Hollywood in 1937, where he appeared in over 50 films. He also served 2 terms as the president of the Screen Actors Guild. Originally a Democrat, he officially became a Republican in 1962. He served as the governor of California from 1967 to 1975 before winning the presidency in 1980. And from 81 to 89, which was his presidency, his tenure was defined by Reaganomics, economic deregulation and tax cuts, and his efforts to end the Cold War alongside Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. Reagan passed away on June 5, 2004 at age 93, and is entered at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley, California. Today, visitors can tour his birthplace and Tampico, which has been restored to its 1911 appearance. Love him or hate him, Reagan reshaped American politics, media, and messaging, proving that storytelling can be just as powerful as policy. February 6, 2011, the Green Bay Packers defeated the Pittsburgh Steelers 31-25 to win Super Bowl 45. Played at Cowboys Stadium in Arlington, Texas, the game secured the Packers' 4th Super Bowl title and 13th league championship overall. The Packers never trailed during the game, opening with a dominant 21-3 lead in the first half behind 2 touchdown passes from Aaron Rodgers and a 31-yard interception returned for a touchdown by safety Nick Collins. The Steelers rallied in the second half, cutting the deficit to 28-25 midway through the fourth quarter. However, a 20-yard field goal by Mason Crosby and a final defensive stand allowed Green Bay to run out the clock. Aaron Rodgers got his ring, Wisconsin got its bragging rights, and cheese sales mysteriously spiked nationwide. On February 6, 1952, Princess Elizabeth ascended the throne to become Queen Elizabeth II, immediately following the death of her father, King George VI. Key facts about her ascension: the transition. At age 25, she became the first British sovereign in over 200 years to accede to the throne while abroad. At the exact moment of her father's death, she was famously staying in a treehouse at the Treetops Hotel in Kenya during the official Commonwealth tour. Due to communication delays, she did not learn of her father's death until several hours later, when Prince Philip broke the news to her during a walk in the garden. When asked by her private secretary what name she wished to rule under, she reportedly replied, "Elizabeth, of course." While she became queen the moment her father died, her formal current coronation ceremony at Westminster Abbey did not take place until June 2, 1953. This delay followed the tradition of allowing an appropriate mourning period. Her reign lasted 70 years and 214 days, making her the longest reigning monarch in British history before her death in September of 2022. She didn't know it yet, but she would become a living bridge between eras, wars, and generations. History sometimes lasts longer than expected. You know, history doesn't move in straight lines. It zigzags. It contradicts itself. And sometimes it argues with us in the comment section. But it keeps going. And so do we. Don't forget, I want to hear from you too. Your family stories fill in the blanks and helps paint the entirety of our world history. Thanks for spending part of your week here in the den. And be sure to tune in on Monday. That's when we'll do part 3 of the family thread after the shot was fired. Thank you guys for hanging out with me. I truly appreciate you. And I'll talk to you next time.